So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce my wife and tonight's author, Jan Bowen.
Thank you. Hi. Wow. This is really nice to see everybody. Thank you. And thank you for that lovely introduction. Every time there's a book event that I've been to, the author comes out and reads a lovely passage from their writing, and the words are inspiring and enjoyable and so forth. Reading from my book wouldn't have that result. It might leave you sitting there and thinking, or it might leave you a little frustrated or whatever, but it's not the sort of book where you just read and get lost in the words. So what I am going to do tonight is try to demystify one of the main topics of the book, and that's finding your purpose. And the reason I chose this part of the book to focus on for the evening is because it's the one that I get the most questions about, and people come to me with the most interest. And I think that we all know what our purpose is. We just don't always know how to articulate it, and it's a matter of deciphering it. So I'm very nervous tonight because it's the only time I've ever spoken in front of family and friends. And you matter much more to me than my business contacts. So there's a quote by William Shakespeare that I think is really excellent at summing it all up. And the way that he puts it, as only he can do, is that the meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it. And that, in essence, is the purpose of life. Once you know why you get up in the morning, what the reason of living is, everything else falls into place. So, on one hand, purpose is a huge deal. It's the reason we live. It's what we, are here for. It's why we exist. And yet, if you asked most people and they were honest, they would say they really don't know what their purpose is. And yet, they're still walking around doing their work, living their life, and contributing in huge ways. So I would contend that they really do know what their purpose is. They just don't know how to articulate it. So it can't be that big a deal, because they're still walking around doing this major contribution in life. So what's the difference, and why even bother? I think the difference that really is compelling is that once people are able to articulate what their difference is, it gives a tremendous peace of mind, and it makes all the difficult parts of life fall into place, and it smooths out the rough edges. And it doesn't have to be something that's announced far and wide. It can be as simple as clarifying it internally to soften and simplify everything else for oneself. So getting there is kind of the trick, right? If everybody knew how to do that, it'd be great. We'd all just be kind of plugging along. So, like George mentioned, in my book is a lot of work. But the trick of doing the work is it takes just a commitment. It takes a willingness to sit with yourself and consider some of the answers. So we're going to do a little bit of that tonight. You can choose to do as much or as little as you want. If you want paper and pen, there's some on the side there. You're not going to, I don't assume you're going to walk out of here saying, I got some new answers. Got some great clarity, got some new answers. But what you might have, if you don't have it already, is some new clarity around some questions that might already be in your mind. And so I want to start with one exercise on what your greatest passion is, what lights you up. And just think about it for a couple minutes, or a couple seconds, I mean. If anything comes to you and you want to write it down. What makes your heart sing? What gives you total joy? And looking around, I know most of you. So I could help you with this answer. I could tell you. But the trick about this answer, too, is that passion doesn't automatically equal purpose. It's a big clue. But it isn't the same thing all the time. So we get to the second exercise. And that's think back over your life from the time you were really young. What were you doing then that you're still doing now in some fashion? Were you always helping people? Were you always fixing things? Were you always teaching? Were you always creating? You know, what activity were you doing then? Obviously, it'll look different. It'll morph. But there's a commonality that's you. Okay, keep that thought in mind. And now there's an exercise that it really does take paper, and you don't have to do it now, but think about, and it's on page 58 of my book, if you have my book and you want to look at it later or whenever. It's the sweet spot. And for those of you who are familiar with Venn diagrams, it's the intersecting circles, the 3 intersecting circles. And in one circle, you list the things that you love doing. In another circle, you list what you're really good at. And in the third circle, you list what other people are always asking you to do, whether you like it or not. And then in the middle is the sweet spot, the intersection of those 3 circles. And you'll find, like I said, this takes, some commitment, the willingness to take the time, but you'll find that there's an interlapping section of those 3 categories. And it's a huge clue right there to what your purpose is. Because what you care about, that you're putting out in the world, that other people are drawing from you, is a pretty good clue of what your purpose is. And a good test is to then go back to the other questions and ask yourself, oh, did that show up there in that answer? And did it show up in that answer? And if it did, you're 90% of the way there. If it didn't, do a little more digging and see what's missing. They're all clues, and one will lead to another. And what you're looking for isn't a new purpose, it's clarity. You already know your purpose because you're doing it. We're all doing it. It's just getting conscious about it to get that peace of mind. So if that peace of mind is so great and the clarity is so great, the other question around it is, so why doesn't everybody have it? What's keeping us off from it? Why is there so much confusion? And there's 2 pitfalls, really. Fear. Fear stops us dead in our tracks every time. And it masquerades in so many different ways. Fear of failure, fear of success, insecurity. Oh my gosh, they'll laugh at me. I'll look like an idiot. I'll forget something. I'll stumble over my words. I'll forget an exercise. Something. And lack of action. I talked about passion being a clue. We can have passion for something. We can think about it. We can dream about it. We can visualize it. We can pray about it. We can do all kinds of things about it. If we don't put action behind it, it's not going to happen. Those lucky people that seem not to put action behind things and have the result that they dream about, if you really examine it, you will see the action. It's just so subconscious and so effortlessly done that it's not obvious, but it's there. There's always action. So to get those 2 pitfalls taken care of, fear and lack of action, if you're kind of, in a quagmire at any point, there's an easy way past both of those. And it's a fun way too. And it's happiness. And tomorrow is actually National Happiness Day. Believe it or not, it's a holiday. And it was declared by the UN. I love it. I absolutely love it. And I love telling people about it because I don't even know how I found this little factoid, but now that I found it, I won't let go of it. Happiness is a signpost that gives us an indicator of whether we're on the right track to cluing into our purpose. And I like to distinguish between the 2 types of happiness. There's a joy-based, there's a pleasure-based happiness, that I like to, I'm going to back up because I got the words all jumbled up there. There's a pleasure-based happiness that the term happiness is the one I like to apply to. And then there is values-based happiness, and that I prefer to refer to as joy, to distinguish between the 2. They're both essential. I mean, we all want to enjoy pleasure, a sunny day, flowers, chocolates. that's all pleasure-based, and it's critical in life. Values-based, though, is the joy that sustains us, that we can feel even in the middle of tragedy. We can be going through world crises and still feel joy because it's values-based. We could be in the middle of a terrorist act and see an act of kindness and feel happy in the joyful sense because someone was kind in the middle of such horror. That's the difference between the two. When you experience the values-based joy, that's the signpost that you're on track with your purpose. So if you're stuck at any point in thoughts with, oh man, I'm really afraid of this, or I just can't get past this stumbling block, and I know this is where I'm going, I know this is right, but look for what hits you in the gut and lights you up with that values-based joy. Feel it rather than think it, and that's how you get past that. And that's the way through. So to summarize it, to get clarity, it isn't that complicated. It truly isn't, but it does take a commitment. It takes a willingness to commit to yourself. It's more about being than doing. Purpose is often confused with doing, filling a role, doing a job. It's not that. It's about being. It's who you are. Teaching is a great example of this, illustration of this. Teaching is a purpose. How you teach can be seen in lots of different ways, and that's the how. You could be a teacher, you could be a filmmaker, and you can teach people through your films. You could do, you could be a radio host and put on programs that are illuminating and teach people. Teaching is the purpose. The job that people choose to do, the role that they fill, is how they're living their purpose. That's a real important distinction as you're thinking through all of it. Being more than doing. The how comes later. It's important, really important, because the action is important. And that's one of the other summary points is don't forget to act and use joy as a signpost.